Following on from my previous video on updating the EuroPi firmware, I thought I would create a video showing how to update Micropython. But before going deep into the process of updating Micropython, I thought it might be worthwhile just taking a few minutes to describe the software stack of the EuroPi and exactly where Micropython and the firmware sits. So here we have a simple diagram. The core microprocessor running in the EuroPi or on the EuroPi is the Raspberry Pi Pico. On top of the Raspberry Pi Pico, we have Micropython. Micropython can be seen as a sort of operating system like Windows or Linux or Mac OS that sits on top of the hardware. And that allows us to interact with the hardware using the Micropython language. Above Micropython, we have a library SSD1306. That is simply Python code that allows us to interact with the OLED screen. Above that, we have the EuroPi firmware, which, as we learned from the previous video, is a collection of files, mainly Python files, that make it easier for us to interact with the Raspberry Pi Pico and the screen and the EuroPi module itself. So rather than having to write long code to interact with things like the digital input or the analog input or the buttons or the knobs or whatever, we can simply write much shorter code by calling some of the functions within the EuroPi firmware. Above the EuroPi firmware, we have the EuroPi contrib package. So that's a collection of community-created scripts that run on the EuroPi, and those are the scripts that you see when you run the menu system. So when you basically press and hold both buttons, it boots into the menu system, and then it shows all of the scripts available within the contrib package. And of course, next to that, optionally, we have your scripts. So you can write your own Micropython code that runs on top of the EuroPi to do pretty much whatever you want. So a key point here, Micropython is actually quite separate to everything above it. So that means that we can upgrade and change Micropython without affecting the firmware, the SSD library, or any of the scripts. Additionally, we can also do the opposite. So we can delete and update files on top within the file system without affecting Micropython. So let's begin the Micropython upgrade procedure. So I have a EuroPi connected here. And if I click the stop restart button, I can learn two things. So I'm showing the Files tab by clicking View and then Files. And we can see that I have the firmware installed on the EuroPi. I can see that the latest version is 0.10.0. I can also learn that I'm running Micropython version 1.19.1. So now if I want to upgrade Micropython to the latest version, I first have to download a file. So if I switch to my browser tab here, I just basically Googled download Micropython Raspberry Pi Pico, and it took me to this page. But I will share this page and the links below. One thing to note is you can also completely wipe the Raspberry Pi Pico using a file called Flash Nuke. You can download that, just do a search for Flash Nuke. I will share the notes in the description here. One important point, if you reset the flash memory, you are actually removing all of the files and Micropython. And if you do that, you will need to install Micropython and the EuroPi firmware, etc. again. However, using this method of only downloading the Micropython file, you can upgrade Micropython without affecting any of the files, the EuroPi firmware, etc. running on your EuroPi. So I've downloaded this file already. If we switch to Thonny, we can see that we're connected. This is not what we want at the moment. We want to actually have the EuroPi, the Raspberry Pi, connected in boot cell mode. So I will simply power down my EuroPi. I will press the white button on the Raspberry Pi Pico, the boot cell button, and then it'll come up in boot cell mode. I'll do that now. To check that it comes up in the right mode, we can go to the Finder tab. I'm running Mac OS. This will be Explorer in Windows, and we can see there that we have the RP2. To install MicroPython, it's as easy as simply dragging and dropping that file. So here is the 1.2.0 file, 1.20.0 file. Let's drop it on. This copies the file to the Raspberry Pi Pico and then executes the file. And then it disappears, which is a little strange if you don't know what you're doing or you haven't seen this before. And now we can simply go to Thonny, reconnect, and we can see that it's now running MicroPython version 1.20.0. And we can also see that all of the original files are there. So we've upgraded MicroPython without affecting the scripts at all running on the EuroPi. So now, when it boots up, it will boot into the menu system, and then we can start using it with the latest MicroPython version. Thanks for watching.